Picture yourself in an American airport in the middle of the 1960s, in the golden age of the jet. The floors gleam. The great glass windows frame the silver airliners out on the tarmac, and the air smells of coffee and cigarettes and possibility, because in 1965 flying is still glamorous, still a thing that dazzles. And through this shining hall walks a young man in a pilot's uniform. The double-breasted jacket, the gold braid on the sleeves, the peaked cap with its crest, the shirt, the tie, the wings pinned above the heart. He is tall and easy and impossibly young, and he walks the way pilots walk in that decade, like a minor god who has agreed, just for today, to move among mortals, and watch what happens around him. The gate agent smiles and waves him through. A pair of stewardesses light up as he passes and fall into step beside him, laughing at whatever he says. A businessman nods with respect. A little boy tugs his mother's sleeve and points. Nobody asks the young man for a thing because the uniform has already answered every question anyone might have. He is a pilot. He belongs. He climbs aboard the jet, folds himself into the little jump seat in the cockpit reserved for airline crew riding along, and flies for free across the country, and everyone who sees him is glad he is there. Now hold that young man in your mind, that gold braid, that easy smile, because the story he will later tell about himself is one of the most beloved crime stories of the 20th century. He will say he did that at 16. He will say he flew over 1 million free miles impersonating an airline pilot before he could legally buy a drink. He will say he was also, in those same teenage years, a doctor and a lawyer, and that he cashed millions of dollars in bad checks in every state and dozens of countries, and outran the FBI and got caught in France, and then was hired by the very bureau that hunted him. It will become a best-selling book. It will become a Steven Spielberg film with a movie star in that very uniform. The whole world will fall in love with the charming boy who fooled everyone. And here is the thing that should stop you cold, the thing this whole evening is about. The single greatest trick that young man may ever have pulled was not the uniform and not the checks and not the cockpit jump seat. It was making you believe he did any of it at all. Evening. I'm Eddie. Come in, hang your coat, sit yourself down by the lamp. I have been turning this one over for a long time, longer than most, because it is a strange and slippery beast, and I want to get it right. If you've not sat with me before, here's the shape of my little vice. I collect swindlers, forgers, imposters, sellers of things they never owned, the whole glorious rogues gallery of history's cleverest liars. I take them down off the shelf one at a time, and you and I hold them up to the lamplight and marvel at the nerve of the human animal. I'm a fan, I admit it freely. Never pulled a real con in my life. The nearest my mate Sully and I ever came was talking our way into a hotel breakfast buffet we had not paid for, on the strength of 2 confident nods and a room number Sully invented on the spot, and we got away clean with a full plate each before either of us lost his nerve. So no, I'm not the operator. I'm the fellow in the cheap seats, leaning forward, whispering how did he do that. But tonight is different from every other night on this shelf, and I need to tell you why up front because it matters. Every other rogue I've shown you, we know what they did. The documents survive. The court records, the victims, the seized goods, the confessions, the crime is proven, and our fun is watching how. Tonight's man is the opposite. Tonight's man is famous not for a crime we can prove, but for a story he told about himself. A magnificent story. A story that made him rich and beloved and respected for 40 years. And the real mystery, the real con, if there is one, is not whether he fooled a gate agent in 1965. It's whether he fooled you and me and Hollywood and half the planet every day since. His name is Frank Abagnale, and you almost certainly know his story. Tonight I want to ask you the one question almost nobody asked for 4 decades. Is any of it true? Let me give you the legend first, and I'm going to give it to you the way he told it, full, glorious, cinematic, because you have to feel the pull of it before you can understand why nobody checked. This is the story as it appears in his 1980 memoir, the book called Catch Me If You Can, and later on the big screen. This is the version the world swallowed whole. The story goes like this. A clever, charming boy from New York, his parents' marriage falling apart around him, runs away from home as a teenager and discovers he has a gift, an almost supernatural gift, for becoming other people. First, he learns to pass bad checks, and he's good at it, frighteningly good, and the money starts rolling in. But he needs cover. He needs to move, to fly, to disappear between cities. And so, at the age of 16, he simply decides to become an airline pilot. Not to fly the plane, to wear the uniform, to ride free in the crew jump seat, to cash his checks in strange towns where a pilot's word is gold. He talks a uniform company out of a genuine pilot's outfit. He talks the airline out of a fake employee ID. And for 2 years, the legend says, he crisscrosses the world in that gold braid over 1 million miles. A teenage boy the whole system waves through, because who on earth would question a pilot? And it doesn't stop there. The legend has him growing bored or cautious and reinventing himself again and again. He poses, it says, as a doctor. For the better part of a year, he supervises a team of real interns in a hospital in Georgia, bluffing his way through medicine he doesn't know, nearly getting a baby killed and fleeing in a panic. He poses as a lawyer, it says, faking a Harvard law degree, passing the bar in Louisiana, working in a state attorney general's office. He poses as a college professor. All of this, the legend insists, before his 21st birthday. And the whole time the bad checks keep flowing, millions of dollars of them, forged and kited and cashed across all 50 states and 26 foreign countries. A one-man financial crime wave in a stewardess's smile and a pilot's cap. And then the fall, and the fall is as cinematic as the rise. He's caught at last in France, the legend says, run to ground by a dogged FBI man who has chased him for years, and thrown into a horrifying French prison, then a Swedish one, then extradited home to serve 12 years in an American penitentiary, and then the perfect ending, the ending that makes it a fable instead of just a rap sheet. The FBI, dazzled by his genius, offers him freedom if he'll come and work for them, teaching agents and banks how to catch men exactly like himself. And he does. The poacher becomes the gamekeeper. The teenage imposter grows into a distinguished, silver-haired security consultant, advising corporations and the government for decades, the most famous reformed con man alive, the living proof that a rascal can be redeemed. Roll credits. It is, I want you to notice, a perfect story. Not a good story, a perfect one. It has the charming underdog, the impossible feats, the glamour of the jet age, the thrilling chase, the redemption at the end. It is exactly the story a person would invent if a person sat down to invent the most irresistible story possible. And that, my friend, is precisely the first thing that ought to have made us suspicious. Because think about the arithmetic of it for one honest second, the way almost nobody did for 40 years. This is a boy who has, on the record, not yet turned 21. And into those few short teenage years, the legend crams a 2-year career as a globe-trotting airline pilot. the better part of a year running a hospital ward as a doctor, a stint as a practicing lawyer with a fake degree and a passed bar exam, a spell as a college professor, and a coast-to-coast, country-to-country tidal wave of forged checks large enough to make him a millionaire. All of it, remember, before he's old enough to legally rent a car. Each one of those careers takes an adult years to fake convincingly. Stacked end to end, they wouldn't fit into a decade, let alone the handful of years a teenager has to spend. When you lay the claims out flat like that, side by side, the whole gorgeous edifice starts to sway before anyone's even opened a file. It isn't the biography of a person. It's the highlight reel of about 6 people welded onto one very charming young man. Because here's a question so simple it feels rude to ask. How do we know all that happened? Where does the story come from? And the answer, when you finally go looking, is unsettling. It comes, overwhelmingly, from one source. It comes from Frank Abagnale. The book is his account of his own life. The interviews are his account. The speeches, the lectures, the movie built on the book, all of it flows from a single spring, and that spring is the memory and the mouth of the man being celebrated. The impostor is the sole eyewitness to his own impostures. The self-confessed greatest liar of his generation is the only person vouching for the tale of his lies. Now sit with how strange that is. In every other case on my shelf, there's a paper trail an outsider left behind, a victim who filed a report, a court that recorded a verdict, a newspaper that ran the scandal while it was hot. The crime exists independently of the criminal's own bragging, but a story that rests entirely on the word of a proven liar is a peculiar kind of evidence, isn't it? It's like buying a used car on the seller's promise that the engine is perfect, from a man who has just finished telling you proudly that lying about engines is the great talent of his life. For 40 years, almost nobody made that simple check. The book sold and sold. The film enchanted millions. Abagnale toured the world giving speeches, and audiences of bankers and executives and federal agents sat rapt while the great reformed rogue told them, in his warm and self-deprecating way, about the 1,000,000 miles and the interns and the Louisiana bar exam. And they paid handsomely for the privilege. And nobody, for 4 decades, walked over to the county courthouse and pulled the files, until at last some people did. And this is where the story turns inside out, so let me name my witnesses carefully, because on this topic more than any other I've ever brought you, the sources are the whole point, and I will not ask you to take my word any more than I'd ask you to take his. The central figure here is an author named Alan C. Logan, who in 2020 published a book with a title that tells you exactly what he set out to do. The greatest hoax on earth, catching truth while we can. Logan did the boring, unglamorous, essential thing that 40 years of starstruck fans had not. He went to the archives. He pulled the contemporary newspaper reports, the actual accounts written at the time in the 1960s, while events were supposedly happening. He dug out court records and prison records, and the paper trail that a real-life leaves scattered behind it. He built a timeline out of documents instead of anecdotes. And there is also the reporting of Javier Leva, whose podcast Pretend devoted a careful investigation to the same question, cross-checking the claims against the record. And here is what the document said when someone finally let them speak. They said the timeline doesn't fit. They said the years the legend gives to the great pilot impersonation. Those years, according to the contemporary record, Abagnale appears to have spent, for a large part, not soaring around the world in gold braid, but in custody, in jails and in prison. A boy cannot be flying 1,000,000 glamorous free miles as a fake captain and simultaneously be sitting in a cell. The two stories cannot both be true, and the cell has the paperwork. The documented crimes that can actually be pinned to him look far smaller, far more local, far more ordinary. The grubby, unglamorous petty check fraud of a troubled young man, than the globe-trotting, multi-identity, million-dollar epic of the book. The grandest set pieces, the ones you remember most vividly from the film. The year as a hospital doctor supervising real interns. The faked Harvard law degree and the Louisiana bar. The sheer transcontinental scale of it all. Those are precisely the claims that the archival record either fails to support or actively contradicts. Contemporary newspapers that should have screamed about a teenage supercriminal are oddly quiet, or tell a much more modest tale. The scale shrinks. The span shrinks. The dazzling resume of impersonations thins out to something a great deal more human and a great deal less cinematic. And notice what kind of evidence this is, because it's the opposite of the legend's evidence in every way that matters. The legend rests on one man's memory, told and retold and polished for profit over decades. The debunking rests on paper that was created at the time by other people, for reasons that had nothing to do with making anyone famous. A newspaper printed in 1966 did not know it would one day be checked against a Hollywood film. It simply reported what it saw. A court clerk filing a docket, a warden logging an inmate, a booking sergeant writing a date, none of them were spinning a yarn. They were just keeping records. And that dull, disinterested paperwork is worth more than 1,000 charming anecdotes, precisely because nobody was trying to entertain you with it. When the entertaining story and the boring documents disagree about where a young man was in a given year, the boring documents win. They always win. That is the whole of Logan's method, and it is devastating in its plainness. He simply asked the story to prove it was somewhere, and again the record placed the man somewhere else. Now here is where I have to be more careful than I've ever been with you, because the whole lesson of this story is about the difference between a good tale and a proven fact, and I would be a hypocrite to debunk one exaggeration by handing you another. So let me draw the line clearly. What is established beyond serious argument is this. Frank Abagnale was a real young man who committed real check fraud and really did time. He existed, he broke the law, he was caught, he was punished. Nobody serious claims he was a total invention. That much is solid. What is also established is that the popular, cinematic version of his life, the specific, spectacular claims that made him famous, has been seriously challenged by researchers working from contemporary documents, and that on several of the biggest claims the documents and the legend simply do not line up. That challenge is real, it is sourced, and it comes chiefly from Alan Logan's archival work and Leva's reporting, not from idle gossip. And what remains genuinely disputed, I'll say it plainly, is exactly which pieces of the legend are pure invention, which are wild exaggerations of something small, and which few might yet turn out to hold up. Abagnale, for his part, has defended his account over the years and pointed to a life's work in fraud prevention. I'm not going to stand here and read you a verdict as if I were the jury, because the honest position, the only honest position, is that a story sold to us for decades as verified fact was, in truth, largely unverified all along, and that when people finally checked, a great deal of it fell down. The scandal isn't that we know he lied about everything. The scandal is that we never knew whether he was telling the truth about almost anything and we cheered anyway. And that, finally, is the con, the real one, the big one, the one that makes this worth an evening of your time. Because look at the shape of it. Forget the 16-year-old in the cockpit for a moment. Look at the grown man. The story of the brilliant teenage imposter, whether it happened or not, became a book. The book became a bestseller. The bestseller became a Hollywood film directed by one of the most famous directors alive, with one of the biggest movie stars in the world playing the charming young rogue. And on the strength of all that fame, the man at the center of it built a long, lucrative, respected career, lecturing corporations, advising banks, standing before rooms full of the most fraud-conscious professionals on earth, and being paid very well to tell them the story of how he once out-conned them all. Do you see it? Do you see the beautiful, recursive shape of it? If the debunkers are right, then the single most profitable and enduring con of his entire life was not committed at 16 with a fake pilot's license. It was committed at 40 and 50 and 60, in a good suit on a lecture stage under warm applause. The great con wasn't pretending to be a pilot. The great con was pretending to have been a great con man, and selling that pretense at premium prices to the very people who pride themselves on not being fooled. The gate agent in 1965 was never the important mark. Even if that scene happened exactly as told, one wave through gate agent is small change. The important mark was the reading public, who bought the book by the million. The important mark was Hollywood, which turned the tale into a beloved film without pulling the court records first. And the most delicious mark of all was every audience of hard-nosed security experts and federal agents and bankers who paid to hear the master describe his genius, and never once, apparently, thought to fact-check the man whose entire selling point was that he was the world's greatest fabricator. He told them to their faces that lying was his art, and then he told them a story, and they wrote him a check. And here is the exquisite twist inside the twist, the thing that makes this the purest specimen in my whole collection. Every ordinary con has a weakness. The moment the mark discovers he's been fooled, the game is over and the con man is disgraced. But look at how this one is built. If the imposter tales are true, then the man is a criminal genius, exactly as advertised and worth every speaking fee. And if the imposter tales are largely invented, well, then he fooled the entire world into believing he was a criminal genius, which takes a criminal genius to pull off, so he's worth every speaking fee anyway. Do you see the trap? There is no version of the story in which he loses. Heads, he's the greatest con man of the age. Tails, he's the greatest con man of the age. The claim proves itself either way, and that is the sign of a con engineered so beautifully that even exposing it only burnishes the legend. The debunking, in a horrible way, is just one more chapter that makes the man more interesting. That is why I say this may be the finest thing on the shelf, and also the one that unsettles me most. Most of my rogues stole money, and money can be counted and returned. This one, if the debunkers have it right, stole something we can't get back. He stole our belief at scale for 40 years and got us to fund the theft and applaud the thief. The money he made was real. The fame was real. The respect of powerful institutions was real. Only the story underneath it all may have been made of air. So let's ask the real question, the one underneath all of it. Not how did he fake a pilot's uniform, that's the easy question and probably the wrong one. The real question is worse. Why did we believe it? Why did millions of intelligent people, for 40 years, accept an extraordinary story on the unsupported word of a man who introduced himself as a professional liar? And the uncomfortable answer is the same one that runs through every con I keep on this shelf. Only this time it isn't about a badge or a uniform. This time, the con exploited something softer and far more dangerous. It exploited the fact that we wanted the story to be true. Rule one of any con, my friend. You do not overcome the mark's suspicion. You enlist the mark's desire. You find the thing they already want to believe, and you simply agree to be it. And what did we want? We wanted the charming underdog. We wanted the clever boy who beat the system without hurting anyone, the glamour of the jet age, the rascal who gets away with it and then, best of all, gets redeemed. It's a wonderful story. It flatters the part of us that roots for the trickster. It asks nothing hard of us. And so, offered a wonderful story by a man who told us plainly he was a fabricator. We did the one thing a good mark always does. We chose the pleasure of believing over the labor of checking. Nobody wanted to be the spoilsport who walked to the courthouse. Nobody wanted to be the one who ruined the film by pulling the files. Checking felt mean, and believing felt marvelous, and so a whole world for 2 whole generations took the delightful thing on trust from, of all people, a man whose fame rested entirely on being untrustworthy. And here is why I really keep this one, why I didn't just tell it to you for the glamour of the jet age, because it is about you and me a great deal more than it is about one silver-haired man on a lecture circuit. We like to think we're the careful ones. We check things. We'd have spotted it. But would you? Really? Because you carry around, right now, a whole gallery of stories you have never once verified. Things you know about your own family, passed down and burnished at every retelling until the good version replaced whatever actually happened. Facts you're certain of because you read them somewhere, once in a caption or a post, and they were vivid and satisfying, so you filed them under true and never looked again. Stories about yourself. The version of your own past you've told so many times that you're no longer sure which parts you remember and which parts you've simply polished. We are all, every one of us, walking around inside stories we accepted because they were told well, not because we ever confirmed they were true. That is the mechanism. That is the whole of it. A good story, confidently told, is the most powerful forging tool ever invented, more powerful than any fake pilot's cap, because it doesn't ask to get past your suspicion. It recruits your delight, and your delight opens the gate from the inside. The con man's real dream isn't a better disguise. It's a story you'd rather believe than examine. And once you've believed it, you become his accomplice because now the story is yours too, and you'll defend it and pass it on and grow annoyed at anyone rude enough to ask for proof. That is how a single lie becomes everyone's truth, not by force but by charm, one delighted listener at a time. And that dream is everywhere now, isn't it, more than ever? The viral post too perfect to be real, that you shared before you checked because it said exactly what you already wanted to hear. The confident expert whose credentials nobody ever looked up. The astonishing statistic that no one traced to a source. The memoir, the origin story, the founder's legend. The whole warm machinery of tales that are too good, too neat, too flattering, and that we wave straight through the gate, because checking would spoil them and believing feels so much better. Frank Abagnale, whatever he did or didn't do at 16, understood the one thing that never goes out of date. Give people a story they love, and they'll do your lying for you. So that's my question for you tonight too, really, and I do read the comments, so come down and find me. First, what's a story you believed for years, told so well and so often that you never thought to check it, until one day you did and it fell apart in your hands? A family legend, a famous fact, a thing everybody knows that turned out not to be so. Tell me the one that surprised you most. And second, the flip side, the one I'm greedy for. Have you ever been the awkward one, the spoilsport who actually checked a story too good to be true, pulled the receipt, looked up the source, asked the rude little question, and watched a beloved tale quietly collapse? What was it? And did anyone thank you for it? Or did they rather wish you'd left the lovely story alone? Tell me both. The tale that fooled you and the time you stopped and checked. Those stories keep the rest of us honest. Put them below. And if you like sitting in the cheap seats with me, taking history's greatest cons apart to see what makes them tick, subscribe, and stick around, because there's a new one every few days, and I've a whole gallery of beautiful liars still to introduce you to. The man who sold a monument he did not own, the forger who fooled an empire and got paid for it, the impostor who convinced a whole nation to obey a second-hand costume. My nephew, sharp lad, thinks he's uncatchable, and last year he very nearly forwarded a stranger's story to half his friends because it was vivid and outrageous and confirmed everything he already believed. A screenshot, no source, no name, just a tale too good to check. He caught himself with his thumb over the button, and only because for 1 second he stopped asking, "Is this a great story?" and started asking, "Do I actually know this is true?" That one question is the whole defense. It always has been. I'll leave you with this. The most dangerous lie is never the clumsy one you're on guard against. It's the beautiful one you'd rather not examine, told by someone charming enough that checking feels like an insult. Frank Abagnale may or may not have flown 1,000,000 miles in a stolen uniform, but he sold the world that story for 40 years, and the world bought it without ever pulling the files, which may just be the greatest con in the whole gallery, because the mark was all of us, and we tipped him for it. So the next time a story lands too perfectly, too flattering, too good to be true, do the one small, slightly embarrassing, faintly rude thing that 40 years of admirers never did. Don't just enjoy the story. Check the man. I'm Eddie. Mind the charming strangers and mind the ones with a wonderful story most of all. And that's how you lose your shirt.